Thank you so much for having me. Super excited to be here. So I'm going to talk today about how children understand AI, children's mental models of visual and text-based generative AI models. And thank you for having me, Sophie. I'm super excited. I love the Buzz Robot talks. Just to give you some background so you know who is even up here. My name's Eliza, and I'm a PhD student at UC Berkeley. I have been working at the intersection of child development and AI for about the last 10 years. Before Berkeley, I was at MIT, where I worked with Josh Tenenbaum and Laura Schultz more in the cognitive development space. I'm also an intern at Google DeepMind right now. We're thinking about children's AI usage. And then I'm also the founder of Eliza Dolls, which is a startup that's working to create kind of these robot dolls to get more women into coding from an early age. So I'm super excited to talk to you guys. I'm very motivated by this quote from Alan Turing. I don't know if you guys are familiar. Alan Turing, obviously one of like these godfathers of computer science and AI, and he was actually, I think, one of the original people who really thought it was important to think about children's minds and babies' minds. And he thought he had this quote that said, instead of trying to produce a program to simulate the adult mind, why not try to produce one that simulates the child's? I think this is super interesting that he himself was already thinking that perhaps one of the ways to get to true AI or AGI would really, you know, would be from children because children have the best examples of learners and they're kind of like creating their own crazy data sets and learning from them, and they're able to generate their own examples and things like that. So I think it's very interesting, and I'm very motivated by this quote. So as I was preparing for this talk, um, actually, maybe I'll start with motivating questions. So the things that I think about the most are, do children really understand the difference between AI and other computer systems? Like, do they know the difference between what an iPhone is or an Alexa or AI? And do parents understand these differences as well? And what are their mental models of AI? What are they thinking about when they are using AI or thinking about AI or how it can be useful for them? How can AI serve them, or what do they want it to do for them? And then how do they actually interact with AI models? So when they're sitting there interacting with AI, what do they actually do, or what are they curious about? And how can we categorize their usage? So when they're actually using AI, how can we even begin to like bucket what they're doing with it? And then how much does modality matter? And modality meaning like if they're using a text-based ChatGPT or an image generator like Dall-E, and how do these differences matter for how children are thinking about these things? And so as I was thinking about this talk, I don't know if anyone saw the news yesterday, but I think we can't do this talk without talking about this big story that broke yesterday where a 14-year-old boy committed suicide, and his mother is actually suing Character AI, claiming that her child was obsessed with this AI chatbot and blaming the company for not having safety guardrails in place. Basically, it's a really interesting, tragic article. And if you read, basically the mother was saying the last thing he did before taking his life was talking to this AI, which he'd been talking to for months. And I think this is going to be like a landmark case in thinking about and defining child safety. And it's really interesting times because I think this is kind of the first time that this is happening. And Character AI, the founders of Character AI were from Google, and DeepMind just reabsorbed them. So I don't know, this is unfolding in real time. And a lot of my work that I talk about is how excited children are for AI. And now thinking about this, I just wonder how, like, what are the real things that we need to implement in terms of safety, and how are AI companies thinking about this? So what I find is that many AI companies are scared to allow children and teens to use their platform, or are basically in denial that children are using them, as I'll talk about in my work. And legally, they have, age restrictions in place. A lot of places don't allow, under 16, under 14, under 13. But obviously, even as Sophia just said, children under these ages are using AI. And I think these companies don't yet know how to conceive of that legally and think about it. So I think we're really at a crossroads where these companies need to be researching how younger children are doing this, are interacting with these models, because I think it can have really detrimental effects. Obviously, there's a lot of other factors in play if you read this article and follow this case, but I think we're going to see more and more cases like this. So really crazy times that we're living in. And, if you have children that are using I think that parents themselves don't even know, because the technology is so new, how to really manage their usage or how to, mediate what they're doing. So I think that it's really going to come down to these companies having to really focus on developing their safety guardrails and figuring out how to do this, because I think that children are just so excited about this. And we're going to have to find a way for them to navigate these platforms safely, because they are kind of our most vulnerable users. With that in mind, this talk is very positive about AI and based on research that I found with kids interacting with it. So I guess just like my takeaway about this is that what I see is that children are really positive and open-minded about AI. So we're going to have to try to protect them as best as we can. Okay, and maybe we can discuss this after the talk. So yeah, children and generative AI. What are children's mental models of AI? I'm going to talk about 3 studies that I've done where we tested 90 children between the ages of 5 and 12 in the Bay Area children's museums, and this is all work I did as part of my PhD. And just to give you a little layout of what the studies look like, our first study was a pilot where we did 18 children between the ages of 5 and 12. And here I'm just going to show you like everything that we did. So really what we're looking at to understand is like, do children even know what AI is? Have they played with AI before? We asked them questions like, do you think AI has friends? Do you think AI is friendly or scary? We get rankings on how friendly or scary do you think it is? Do they think AI has feelings like happy or sad? Does it know the difference between good and bad? How human do they think it is? If you pinched an AI, would it feel pain? And what we're really trying to understand here is, are children anthropomorphizing AI? So how human do they think AI is? And what does that mean in the long term if children are able to understand that it is or isn't human? And I think in the case of the teenage boy, I think that's really important. How much did he understand what was going on? And at 14, do they understand what this technology is? And how is that going to come into play as youth start interacting with this technology? So after we ask them all those questions, they interact with the models in front of us. Here they're using ChatGPT and Dall-E, so a text-based AI generator and an image-based one. We give them 4 prompts each where they tell us what they want to search. We type it in for them. We make sure it's safe to show them, and then we flip the laptop around and we tell them what the replies are. We show them the images, and then we ask parents a couple questions like, to your knowledge, has your child used AI before? And how often are they using search engines? Things like that. And we try, given that some of these are 5-year-olds using AI for the first time, we try to explain to them like, oh, you can ask it any question you want and it'll answer it for you, or you can get any picture you want. What would you like to see? So sometimes there's this little barrier of trying to get them to understand what's going on. And then, so just to look at quickly some of the pilot data, here you can see for every question kind of what the results were. Even asking children, do you know what AI is? 83% are saying no. But then have you played with one before? 44% are saying yes. And if you look at if we begin to tease out some of these results, what we find is that children are finding it like, so here, is it friendly? 88% say yes. Does it make you happy? The green here are all the positive interactions. So we're seeing a lot of positives. So like they think it's happy, they think it's friendly, they think it knows that maybe the difference between good and bad. They don't think for the human interaction questions like that it can't get upset or can't get scared, it can't feel hunger. It feels like they're really understanding that it's some form of technology and doesn't have any human-like attributes. And they're feeling overwhelmingly positive about it. So this is what guided the rest of the experiment, which I think is really interesting. And again, just showing that children are very overwhelmingly positive about this technology, and it's seemingly understanding that it's not very human and they're not anthropomorphizing it at this age. So the follow-up study that we did based on that data was very similar, but the difference really here being was that we asked the questions before and after they interacted with the AI models. So we asked a bit less, a fewer of the questions to try to squeeze it into our time frame. This is a 20-minute experiment. So here we ask some of the same questions, then they interact with the models, then we ask the same questions, and then some follow-ups for the parents. And I think, of course, we have to look at like, so what are some examples of what the children are even searching for? I find their queries so interesting and unique. Here are just some of my favorites. I thought we could go through them. My my personal favorite is Eva, age 12, who wanted to see My Little Pony with Demon Slayer. An interesting insight into this girl's mind, I think. And it seems like a lot of children here, at first they start simple and then they kind of understand that they can go, more in depth into the search and are getting more curious with their searches. And, you know, as you can expect, we have a 7-year-old, they want to see chocolate candy. They want to see Harry Potter. They want to see a kitten. They want to see a rainbow. A 5-year-old wants to see a vampire transforming into a bat, into a cat, into a werewolf, into a snake. So I think they're beginning to understand like the layers of what they can do with these models. And this is using Dall-E, the image generator. Here are some more fun examples. They're searching a sunrise, a picture of an alien, a shipwreck, a nine-tailed fox, an alicorn, a unicorn, and a Pegasus mixed together. I have no idea what an Appaloosa and a buckskin horse combined is, but you can see they're really starting to combine, and definitely some preferences for animals here. Just a couple more fun ones. A big house that looks like a face, a cartoon panda wearing glasses, a stick figure in the style of Ben Orlin. They're getting very sophisticated. So you can see they're really creative. They have no problem generating these prompts and they really they get into it. When we look at what they're asking in GPT, these questions seem a little bit different in terms of creativity. I'm seeing a lot more like genuine curiosity questions here. So like, what's your favorite color? Some children are also beginning to almost do like Turing tests. So asking the AI, what's your favorite color? How are you created? Or what is the meaning of life? What is the best breed of dog? Do you know how to play in general? Is there a Santa Claus? Hopefully it tells them yes. How do teeth get wobbly? Why do bears have to go potty in the forest? Why do monarch butterflies have to fly to Mexico? Why do you have to turn off lights in a movie theater? I mean, these are just fascinating. I could read these all day, but I think it's really interesting that they have these questions. My favorite is Show My Mom. That's a real Turing test there. Pikachu Fat is another favorite. Make a dog look like a baby, but it's still a dog. Show yourself as a human. I don't know. These are really fun. Um, and so then we begin to tease apart. We categorize the questions into being more logical questions versus emotional questions. So the logical ones are really like, is AI like a human? Does AI know good versus bad? And then we get into the emotional questions. Can AI get upset? Is AI friendly? Does AI have feelings? Can AI feel pain? And this is the before and after interacting with the AI. And what we see is between the logical questions, the answers seem mostly unchanged, but the emotional ones have the biggest stark differences where we actually see a decrease in how emotional they think these models are, especially with being upset or having feelings. For friendly, how do you interpret this graph with the friendly? They're basically saying that the AI is friendlier actually than they initially thought, and a slight change in the feeling pain question, but very minimal differences in the logical one. Um, but one of the most interesting takeaways that I think we find is that we tried to categorize their search based on modality, and we have 4 categories of how we break down what they search. So every time they search something, we have blind coders assign it to a category. And these 4 categories, it's a 2 by 2. So let me try to break it down. Basically, we categorize it. Are they searching for something that exists in the world or doesn't exist in the world? And are they searching for something that they have access to or they don't have access to? So the E stands for exists. And then the second letter is access or no access. So this first category is they're searching for something that exists in the world and that they have access to. That's EA. The second category is exists, but they don't have access to, so no access. The third bar here is doesn't exist in the world, but they have access to it. And the fourth one is doesn't exist and they don't have access to it. And the orange bars here are what they're searching in GPT, and the teal bars are what they're searching for in Dall-E. So the way you interpret this is basically what we're finding is that when children are using ChatGPT, they're most likely to be in the EA category, meaning they're almost using it as just like a search engine, trying to reaffirm their own knowledge base, and they're really searching for things that exist in the world and they have access to. Um, versus if you look at the largest categories for Dall-E, the biggest difference we see here is that for the doesn't exist in the world, don't have access to, that category is the largest for Dall-E. And just to give you some examples, so for example, for exists and they have access to, this could be like, show me a Honda Civic. For exists, no access, that would be like, show me a rocket ship in space. It exists in the world, but they can't go to their backyard and see a rocket ship in space. For doesn't exist and they have access to, that would be like, maybe like a superhero from a TV show or something, doesn't exist in the world, but they could see it on TV or something like that. But then I think for like doesn't exist, no access, that's like something more imaginative, really like unicorn in space or something like that. So I think the most interesting finding here is that the modality really matters, and that with Dall-E, with this image generating one, kids are being so much more imaginative and creative in what they're finding. And I think this really shows promise for a positive tool that children will be able to use that isn't something that's maybe like diminishing how they're thinking about things. I think a lot of parents are really worried, especially with older kids, that they're using AI to cheat with their homework and things like that. But I think when I see results like this really shows me that with the more like creative models, like the image generated models, that children will be able to actually like push their curiosity more and really get imaginative and search for things and perhaps like push the boundaries of their own imaginations in a way they never have before. Like when I grew up, and presumably everyone in this room, when we grew up, we didn't have this, right? So our imagination was bounded by like not reality and not what we could physically see. And I think being able to like translate your imagination into this concrete thing is going to have some type of interesting effect on how children are growing up. And I'm really curious to see like how this will affect how they're thinking about these things and how it'll really like push the boundaries of their creativity and allow them to almost pursue it and use it as like a tool to help them think more creatively. And if anyone has kids, and this is definitely a fun thing to do with your kids, like have them search things in Dall-E. It's really fascinating. Um, but when you break down these results a bit further, what I think it really comes down to is that really what kids want to see in Dall-E is things that don't exist in the world. I think it's less about the access and more about does it exist or not exist in the world. And that's this plot on the left. You can see with GPT, you know, 84% of what they're searching for exists, but with Dall-E, only 55% exists. And I think that's a stark difference and really shows you like they want to see things that don't exist in the world. And that's what they're fascinated by, which I think is super cool. In terms of have children used AI before? I think this is interesting to think about as well. And this is what parents are reporting. So again, these are 5 to 12-year-olds. 75% or 76% are saying that their child has used AI before, which is really interesting. And then in terms of what AI have they been using, what I see is the number one thing is voice AI. So majority in this case being Alexa and a Google Home and Siri. If you look at the second Venn diagram, like that's the majority of what children are interacting with, which makes sense, right? Younger children can't type yet or read, so the voice one is the best way for them to interact with AI. And this is probably going to be the number one way that children are interacting with AI and are today, and the models that they're going to be using. And then, 13% by name are already saying ChatGPT. A couple people said they're Teslas. So I think this is interesting. It's clear that parents have a notion of what AI is and in which ways their children are using it. And I'm sure the people listening, your kids may be interacting with these as well. Okay, and then in terms of preferences, we asked children, what do you prefer, like GPT or Dall-E? So text versus image, and overwhelmingly it was the image generator, which I think makes sense. And this was a bit age dependent as well. So even younger and older kids all seem to prefer this image generator one. I wonder if we were testing voice, though, if that might be actually their preferred. I'm not sure. So that's something I'm looking to do in the future. This is just a screenshot of asking kids like what their favorite part of the task was, and you can kind of see here overwhelmingly it's about pictures. They like asking questions, but they love seeing the pictures, drawing this, seeing this picture, drawing the picture, seeing the picture, getting pictures, picture. So I think this really shows you that they're very motivated by the visuals more than they are the text. And then of course we had to ask kids like, well, what do you want to do with AI? And this is a little hard to see, but I think these are really fascinating, and I have the ages there. So someone says a robot dog. A lot of them wanted robots, which is really interesting. Someone said an army of artificial intelligence, a 3D printer. Ask it to print me money. That 7-year-old knows what they're doing. Big house. Build a mouse on top of a cat. Build a whole house with candy in it. Create another creating money. Homework, robots. I think there's a theme here. Yeah, ice cream to get food. I think, yeah, these are really funny. Make a swimming buddy. So, and I wonder how this would change as they get older, but it almost seems like some of them are really seeking companionship. We had one child say, like, I wish it could read to me every night, and the parent is in the corner, like, I swear I read to them every night, and I don't know. I think it's really interesting to see, how this is emerging and what children want to do with it. So I think like the key findings here are the modality really matters. And what I'm finding is that children really seem to enjoy Dall-E more than GPT. However, like I said, we didn't test any voice models, so I would wonder like what would take preference there given children's experience with that. And they're using the different models in different ways, and they seem to understand the differences. So they understand that with Dall-E, they can query about things that don't exist in the world in this visual way. And I think that's important. And the main way that children are currently interacting with AI is through audio, like Alexa and Google Home. So, yeah, my question is like, is the future audio plus visual or something like that? Um, Children are finding AI friendlier and less scary after interacting with it. And children don't think AI exhibits human characteristics like emotions, feelings, or physical pain. And I would conjecture that the adult data looks very different there. And yeah, so children are using the text-based models like GPT to reaffirm their pre-existing knowledge, while using the visual-based one for more creative and imaginative queries, more likely things that don't exist in the world. Uh, Children are very optimistic and open-minded about AI, and I believe that it's parents that seem to be the barrier for them using these models, and they have no problems generating search queries or anything. They seem to just sit right down and give you tons of queries, and they want to keep going. They don't want to stop. And maybe just to harp on the children are optimistic and open-minded about AI point, this is where I think things are just going to get the most complicated because children have this naive optimism and curiosity about this technology, and they are going to play with this technology and use it. And like we've seen in the news, I think this is going to be like the ultimate barrier. So, how do parents learn to figure out how to navigate this space? And how are these companies going to basically like accept that children are going to be using these models and learn to put in the correct safeguards for these models, which is super complicated, obviously.
I see a question in the chat. Where are the kids sourced from? Are they from Google or academic community?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the way we do research at UC Berkeley is we partner with various children's museums in the Bay Area, and we basically go there every weekend. And the way we get, so the Bay Area Children's Museum, the Children's Curiosity Museum, a lot of the children's museums, and we basically just go up to parents that are already there, and I would say like, "Hi, I'm Eliza. I'm a researcher at Berkeley. I have a game today about AI for kids ages 5 to 12. Are you interested?" And if the parents are approve and they sign our waiver, then we play this game with them right in the museum. We have a little desk set up. So it's somewhat random in terms of that, but obviously the population is someone that, can afford to go to a children's museum on a weekday or a weekend, which, isn't the whole population, but that's how we recruit.
You described what they were asking, but do you have what ChatGPT was answering? And did you notice any like biases or hallucinations in ChatGPT answers?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, we track all the responses and everything. So given the almost simplicity of their questions, it wasn't really hallucinating, especially because they would just say, like, like, how big is the earth, or questions like that, which are kind of grounded in science. I didn't see many hallucinations on that front. I would say some of the things we run into are sometimes the image search is not being safe for children. And that's why we had the safeguard where we would actually like look at it first before we show it to them. One notable example is a child wanted to see a bunny, and it returned a weirdly sexual bunny. So we didn't show them that result.
Did you try to put the context information to ChatGPT that interlocutors will be from 5 to 12 year old, and maybe he would it would take into consideration that, or did you consider your private account with ChatGPT with your history of prompts and your context?
We did a new account for this entirely. And then the second question, we would, actually, when you ask things in GPT without saying anything, it does give very long answers. So something that we did do to curb it, we would always say answer in 1 to 2 sentences, but we wouldn't say anything about the age of the user interacting with it. But definitely to shorten it, because when you ask a question, it gives a very, very long answer typically if you don't curb it. So that's one thing that we did implement as we were going, because then we'd have to read this long answer to the child every time. So we limited to just 1 to 2 sentences, but that's all we did.
I see Grant is asking in the chat, have you seen any schools in the Bay Area or in the US that integrate AI in their K-8 curriculum?
I haven't seen this in the Bay for this age range, but OpenAI and DeepMind are doing all kinds of pilot studies in colleges. There's one that they've talked about where they're at Arizona State. They're deploying different AI tutors for college students and beginning to do studies there, which I think is really interesting. They're starting older, obviously, because I think that's a little easier and to work with that population. But I think those results are going to be super interesting. And DeepMind put out a paper about, a very long paper about education and AI and the work that they're doing. I think it's super interesting. So I think that's where we're going to see the first wave of results and data from, and then perhaps it'll trickle down into younger ages.
If we're creating, for example, an LLM for children, we live in an inherently biased world where the content that is put out by the universe is made by so many different people that believe in different things. Do we trust, or do we put that in a company to make those decisions, to decide what those guardrails are? How do we, if we don't know what the whole world is aligned to, how do we decide who gets to decide what the LLMs are going to be trained on? You know what I mean?
I think that's a really hard question. I mean, what we've seen, right, is that it really kind of comes down to the companies. I think as much as people want some type of maybe a government intervention, those are always kind of like the last thing to come. And so I think it kind of just boils down to the companies. And that's what's so crazy, is that it will boil down to the companies having to make these decisions, because what I find is that just lawmakers and governments are so far behind on all these topics usually that they're not going to be the ones that set standards or intervene in time. So it really comes down to the companies having to decide. And